at the Appellate Division First Department for our Black History Month program, a spotlight on moving justice forward, Black men in the law and the judiciary. For those of you who are meeting me for the first time, I am Bahati Pitt Burke, one of the Associate Justices of the Appellate Division First Department. I'd like to take time to introduce a couple of the notable individuals who are here. Judges from this court, we have Associate Justice, and this is in order of seniority because that's how we do everything around here. Peter Moulton, David Friedman, Ellen Gesmer, Lisbeth Gonzalez, Kelly O'Neill Levy, and Marcia Michael, the Associate Justices of this court. I'd like to also introduce the Honorable Edwina Richardson, the Deputy Administrative Judge for Justice Initiatives. The Supervising Judge from New York Civil Court, Shahabuddin Ali. And the Supervising Judge from Bronx County, Matthew Parker Rasso. I want to give special thanks to Susanna Rojas, the clerk of our court, and Adam Horowitz, the Director of Special Projects here at the Appellate Division First Department, for helping put all of this together, and as well as our staff and our court offices, Chief Cavallo over there in the corner, and all of the court offices. Our main goal today is to raise awareness of a problem that should concern us all: the lack of Black men in the judiciary, particularly in the trial and appellate courts of New York. Our hope is that our discussion will shed light on the steps that can be taken to ameliorate the problem and inspire people to act toward the goal of increasing the representation of Black men in the judiciary. While our focus today is New York City, we hope that this program will serve as a model for discussion in other jurisdictions throughout the state where Black men in the judiciary do not adequately reflect the representation of their communities. Before I introduce our panelists, allow me to also recognize Anne-Marie Jolly, the Citywide Family Court AJ. On our panel today, we have New York State First Deputy Chief Administrative Judge, the Honorable Norman St. George. Honorable Paul Wooten, Associate Justice of the Appellate Division Second Department. The Honorable Eddie McShann, Associate Justice of the Appellate Division Third Department. And the Honorable Alvin Yearwood, Administrative Judge, Bronx Supreme Court Criminal Term. Our panel discussion will be led by Horace Anderson, Jr., the Dean of the Elizabeth Haub School of Law at Pace University. But at this time, I would like to introduce you to the Appellate Division First Department's formidable leader, Presiding Justice Diane T. Renwick. PJ Renwick, as she is affectionately known in these halls, joined the Appellate Division in 2008, making her the first Black woman to be appointed to the court. In June 2023, she was appointed by Governor Hochul to serve as presiding justice. With this historic appointment, Presiding Justice Renwick became not only the first woman of color to preside in the Appellate Division First Department, but also the first woman of color to be presiding justice in any appellate court in New York State. So ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Diane T. Renwick.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Justice Pitt Burke, for that generous introduction. What Justice Pitt Burke did not say is that she chairs our anti-bias committee here at the court. I used to have that position before being appointed, and I have, asked her to chair it. I know the court is in excellent hands, and she did not hesitate to take on the responsibility. I thank you very much. Whether you're in person or via live stream, I want to thank all of you for joining us as we celebrate Black History Month. This evening's event is a panel discussion, as Justice Pitberg explained, titled A Spotlight on Moving Justice Forward, Black Men in the Law and the Judiciary. This is but one of many events that we hope to be hosting here at the Appellate Division First Department to raise issues of interest to the bench and bar and to inspire the next generation of lawyers and judges. Before we begin, I'd like to extend my sincerest gratitude to this evening's excellent panelists, our outstanding first Deputy Chief Administrative Judge. They've already been introduced, but they're worth introducing again. Norman St. George, Appellate Division 2nd Department Justice Paul Wooten, Appellate Division 3rd Department Justice Eddie McShann, Administrative Judge of Bronx Supreme Court Criminal Term Alvin Yearwood, and Dean Horace Anderson, our contributing moderator who so generously has given his time to be with us this evening. All of these other people work for the court, but he's here because he really wants to be, and I thank you for it. I'm sure this will be an enlightening and enlivening discussion. It is widely recognized that diversity leads... I'm sorry, Associate Justice Sharon Aarons, Appellate Division, 3rd Department. And I'm looking right at her, and we spoke downstairs. It is widely recognized that diversity leads to healthier institutions in a democratic society, particularly in the third branch of government, where a free discourse and open exchange of legal perspectives is so critical. If our judiciary adequately reflects the makeup of our citizenry, it gains legitimacy in the eyes of the people it is designed to serve. As explained by Sherilyn Eiffel, law professor and president and director counsel emeritus of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, diversifying the judiciary is beneficial because, quote, the interplay of diverse views and perspectives can enrich judicial decision-making. Professor Eiffel further explains that, quote, because they can bring important and traditionally excluded perspectives to the bench, minority judges can play a key role in giving legitimacy to the narratives and values of racial minorities. That is true everywhere. At the Appellate Division First Department, as in New York courts more broadly, we are undoubtedly benefiting from the array of perspectives that come from increased diversity in the judiciary. But there remains significant work to be done, which brings us to this evening's topic. There is, for instance, a striking absence of Black male judges at the Appellate Division First Department, and frankly, throughout the court system. The first Black man to be appointed to our court, or any appellate division, was Justice Harold Stevens in 1958. Very interesting, that's earlier than one might think, 1958, but it was during the Civil Rights Movement. However, it would be another 24 years before another Black male jurist would be appointed, or any Black male or woman would be appointed to the Appellate Division First Department, 24 years. In fact, only 5 Black men have been appointed to the court in its 130-year history. All of them were accomplished jurists. Indeed, 3 were appointed to the Court of Appeals following their terms in the Appellate Division. The 5 jurists were Justices Harold Stevens, Fritz W. Alexander II, we share the same birthday, George Bundy Smith, Milton L. Williams, and Leland DeGrasse. Justice Stevens also served as the first Black presiding justice, Justice Williams as the second. So these were outstanding jurists. There was no question of their capacity and their capability. Perhaps it's no surprise that most of these judges served as the sole Black judge on the court. Only the last 2, Williams and DeGrasse, overlapped, and that was for less than a year. There has not been a Black man appointed to the First Department in the 8 years since Justice DeGrasse retired in 2015. Judge Samuel Green was the first and only black male judge, I believe I'm correct on this, to be appointed to the 4th Department in 1983. Judge Eddie McShann, one of our panelists, and a Bronx Supreme Court jurist, was the first appointed to the Appellate Division 3rd Department in 2022. And the first black male appointed to the 2nd Department, where there is a better record of black male appointments, was William C. Thompson Sr., and that appointment was in 1980. Since then, I hope I'm not missing anyone, but I believe it was George Joya, Judge Cozier, and of course, there might be one other, but Judge Wooten, who is with us this evening, and the Honorable William Ford, who was appointed in 2021. So it is no secret that there is a dearth of black men on the New York State Supreme Court who could be appointed to the Appellate Division. In fact, that's why Justice McShann, a 1st Department judge, was appointed to the Appellate Division 3rd Department. What are the causes of this shortage? I think it's clear that the reasons are numerous and complex. Is it because there aren't any black lawyers? Is it because there's not the view that black lawyers are capable? Is it because of a pipeline issue? Is it perception of what a black male lawyer is capable of? I don't know. It's a complex issue. Although we will not be covering them all this evening, tonight's discussion will certainly, I hope, shed some light on the problem, and I also hope that it will spark some ideas for potential solutions. There is no question that having black men, among others, in positions of leadership helps break down the insidious stereotypes that unfortunately persist even today. While we are fortunate to now have Chief Judge Rowan D. Wilson as New York's first ever black chief judge, the judiciary is still in need of the black male perspective at all levels. Tonight, we will hear from these distinguished black male judges who will share stories of their ascension to the bench and their perspectives on the reasons for and possible solutions to the relative scarcity of black men in the judiciary and in the legal profession more broadly. Again, I'd like to thank this evening's panelists and our moderator for taking the time out of their busy schedules to engage in this evening's interesting conversation. Lastly, as always, I'd like to thank all of our excellent staff here at the court who have assisted us in putting on tonight's event, Justice Bahati Pitt Burke, also our inimitable clerk of the court, which Justice Pitt Burke, there she is, she's always hiding, but this woman is incredible. The clerk of the court, Susanna M. Rojas. My chamber's staff, our court officers, the engineers and custodians who make sure that we can have more than one thing on outlets so that they don't go off. And it is, after all, a landmark building built in 1896 to 1900, so it's pretty old. And the numerous others who've made this evening possible. And without further delay, I'm pleased to introduce this evening's contributing moderator, Honorable Horace E. Anderson, Jr., Dean and Professor of Law at Elizabeth Hobbs School of Law at Pace University. Just a quick bio. Dean Anderson was appointed in December 2019 to serve as the 9th Dean of Pace. Is it okay if I call it Pace Law School? Okay. Pace Law School. He joined the faculty in 2004 and served as the school's Associate Dean for Academic Affairs from 2011 until his appointment as Interim Dean in 2018. Under his leadership, Pace Law School achieved its first national ranking as the #1 environmental law program and launched innovative new programs in health law and policy, sustainable business law, and social justice. Dean Anderson's areas of legal expertise include intellectual property, internet privacy, law and technology, and communications law. Prior to joining the law school, Dean Anderson practiced law at the firm of White and Case. Dean Anderson holds a JD from the University of Pennsylvania Law School and a BS in economics with a concentration in Finance from the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania. I leave this in the very, very excellent hands of Dean Anderson. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, PJ Renwick. It's kind of hard to listen to all of that. I was hoping we would be able to rush past the introduction, but she wouldn't let us. So I'm going to set our conversation up with a little bit of data. And I'm going to warn everybody that the data is not as robust as I think we would probably like it to be on the specific question that we are considering this evening. The data about Black people in law school, Black people becoming lawyers, generally is not broken out by gender. And so I'm going to give you a mix of data coming from studies that have been published by USA Today and by the Brookings Institution, mixed with some of my observations at Pace over the last few years. So 6% of admitted attorneys across the country are Black. And as I said, we don't know how that group breaks down, male versus female. And we know that part of the question about Black male judges has to do with how many Black male lawyers are being produced every year. We don't have great data on males specifically, but 6% of admitted lawyers are Black. 34% of Black adults have an associate degree or higher. And as we all know, the first step to becoming a lawyer in the United States is earning a bachelor's degree. Since 2020, there's been a 7% decline in Black college enrollment. 40% of those who are enrolled in college, Black students that is, 40% graduate within 6 years. If you go back before that, in terms of the previous level of school, in 2021, Black boys graduated from high school at a 76% rate. So this graduation rate, 76% from high school. For white boys, it was 87%. For Black girls, it was also 87%. And for white girls, it was 92%. Not to make our entire population binary, but those are usually the groups whose data is collected in the United States. And so we see something of a pipeline problem, but it's still very hard to define. So as I said, 6% of admitted lawyers are Black. I actually asked my own admissions office to look at our most recent class to see how that broke down, and it was 60-40 women to men. That's actually better than it's been for quite some time. So what I see standing in front of the classroom most years, and what I see interacting with our Balsa chapter most years, is something more like 75-25, 80-20 in most years. So we had a particularly good year this year, but that's not to say that we will necessarily repeat that next year. So that's sort of a little bit of a grounding in what data we do have. Some of this conversation is going to be about the pipeline, but that's not going to be the entire conversation, I suspect. And in fact, I want to shift gears now from data to stories, and I want to ask each of our panelists to describe his journey to law school, through the legal profession, and to your present position. What is it that drove you and got you to where you are today? And we'll start with Justice St. George.
Good evening, everyone. So the simple answer to the question is my parents. My father came to this country 1956 from Jamaica, West Indies, on a track scholarship.
Big up.
Well, I'll go on. And this was the shot. There was no alternative. single, poor mom. They offered him full scholarship to come and run and play soccer. Difficult period in our country's history, especially in the Midwest. Wouldn't cut his hair when he went to the local barbershop. But his view was that education is the key to success, not only in this country, but in this world. And so he went on to get 3 master's degrees, a doctorate degree, became a psychiatrist, and he instilled that into me. He instilled education is the equalizer. And he came with a poem, and the poem was Heights by Great Men, and I add, and women, because I have 2 daughters, and it's appropriate. Reached and kept were not achieved by sudden flight, but they, while their companions slept, were toiling upwards through the night. So what that means is everyone else is sleeping and resting, you're still working. You have to be better. So that's the easy answer. My mother taught me love and compassion. So that has been the driving force in my life. I have a lot of observations. I cannot believe that 6 life. I have a lot of observations. I cannot believe that 6% of people of color are, only 6% are lawyers. I think it has to do with early education. I think it has to do with a pipeline. I think it has to do with people not knowing how to get involved in the political system to be considered to be a judge. So we could talk about that for hours. I'll just give you one anecdote about early education. And because education is a key, if you start at 5 years old, you're 2 to 3 years behind. And you're never going to catch up. That's a problem. So my 2 daughters, we put in early education 2.5 years old. So the children who you didn't have the finances, you didn't have parents of means, you got to school at 5 years old and you're starting to learn, you're behind already. You're never going to catch up. The other thing is that the public schools in our areas are not working properly. So I went to public school, elementary school. My first week in the junior high school in my area, Roosevelt, which was a considerably bad area during that time. I came home from school one day and asked my father if I could ride my bike to school. And he said, why? And I said, because you could ride right to the classroom and you don't have to walk through the school. And he said, what do you mean you could ride through the classroom? I said, people ride their bikes to the class and they leave their bikes outside the room, the classroom. No one said a word about it. No one said a word. The next week I was in private school. Next week, Long Island Lutheran High School. My father said, I didn't come here and burn my fingers and make a living for you to ride your bicycle to school. So that's an observation about certain schools and what's allowed, what's not allowed. And so then going to private schools set me on the trajectory that my parents wanted me to be on. So I'm going to leave it there because I know everyone has a story, but that's the start of the story, then leads to college and law school, and I'll talk about me being one of only 3 men of color in law school, so, which is consistent with the stats. So if you're not going to law school, you're not going to be a lawyer, and then you're not going to be a judge. And in Long Island, we may have 1 judge in all of the courts of color at a time. There's many times maybe we had 2. I currently am the only elected Supreme Court justice in Nassau County that is a man of color. And before me, I was elected in 2019. Before me, we gave the chief judge the Alfred S. Robbins Award Thursday past in Nassau County. Alfred S. Robbins was the first man of color elected to the Supreme Court. He left the bench probably in 92, 93. The next man of color in Nassau County history to be a Supreme Court justice was me in 2019. So 92, 93. Only other man of color during the period of time, Judge Carter. Only county court had, the only person of color in the county court as a male. I then became the second. Before I was Supreme Court, I ran for county court. I was one of 2 in district court. So that's why I thank the Appellate Division and PJ Renwick for putting this program on. This is a crisis. It's a crisis.
I'm the mother of 3 boys, 3 young men.
We need to talk about it.
Thank you. Justice Wooten.
Thank you. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge one of my colleagues from the Second Department, if that's okay. Associate Justice Lillian Wan from the Appellate Division Second. No, it's okay. For me, I think it's very similar. It begins with the family. It begins with parents. My family were farmers in Meridian, Mississippi. And so I am a product of the northern migration of African Americans from the South post-Civil War to the North. And when I was, when I was very young, my father, and he served in the Navy, and he was in the segregated Navy, and after World War II, he got out, and there weren't any opportunities for farmers in Meridian, Mississippi. It was still a very heavily segregated, very an oppressive situation. So he had $5 in his pocket, and he just married, and he just came north. And he had a relative in Boston, and so he took a chance, and he came to Boston. And he ended up staying with a relative, and he got a job, a union job, and then he sent his family, and his family came north, and that's where me and my brother were born. He is one of 3. My mother was one of 11. She's the oldest of 11. Actually, she's really the oldest of 12 because the first was stillborn. And their parents were farmers, sharecroppers, and their parents were sharecroppers in Mississippi. And their parents were slaves. So they came forward, and when I was young, my parents always said, that boy's gonna be something someday. That's, I guess, because I talked a lot. But they believed in us. Like Norman, they thought education was the key, was the equalizer. And every year, my father would take us, me and my brother, and he would drive to Mississippi so we could visit my grandparents. And, we're young, and we never really understood why, when we had that drive, and it's like 20 hours, why he could never stop. Okay? When he was driven from Boston all the way to Mississippi, because it's not like now where you have the interstate and you have hotels, he could not stop. You had to be in the car, you had to eat in the car. If you were lucky, you could stop and you could use the bathroom on the side of the road, but because of how things were in the South, you had to go straight through. And when we get to Mississippi, one day there's a situation where there's a black police officer, and a black police officer sees an infraction of a white man. And the black police officer didn't do anything about it. I asked my father about it. My father said, well, black police officers cannot arrest white people here. I said, that's true? He says, yes. Well, the black police officers are for black people. If a black officer sees a white man committing an infraction, he has to call a white officer to come over and engage the white perpetrator. And this is the situation that my family migrates from north. And my father, and he had a high school diploma. My mother had a high school diploma. They didn't go to college. They were lucky enough to get union jobs and forward their generation to the next generation, because me and my brother, we were the first to go to college from our generation. And so we stand on the shoes of our ancestors, meaning our family and all those people in the South who had to sacrifice for us to come north to make a better life for so many others in our community. And that is what motivated me to be an attorney, and that's what motivated me to be a civil rights attorney, and that's what motivated me to, actually I was an election law attorney. I used to do cases that provided ballot access for people of color to become elected officials. Because it's my experience that there is a 1-to-1 ratio between us and our elected officials. When we have a expansion on the number of elected officials and opportunity for people to vote, our numbers go up. Same thing in the judiciary election, our numbers go up. We are a reflection of the community that votes for us and invests their trust in us. And it is unfortunate that we have so few black men on the bench. Actually, I know your data, the ABA data, I actually found said the number of black attorneys is 5%. The ABA did a study, and theirs is between 4.7 and 5%. And that number stays steady between 2010 and 2020. Because we've got like 35,000 students every year graduate the past 3 years. It's averaging about 35.8 from law schools, and we are about 8% coming out of law school. And totally, of the total number of attorneys, we're around 5%. So that's what motivated me to get here and to go to law school and to feel that I wanted to dedicate my life to making a difference.
Thank you.
So good evening, everybody. My name is Eddie McShann. I'm currently an Associate Justice of the Appellate Division 3rd Department. And I didn't realize that my family were neighbors to Judge Wooten's family, because I was born down in Cuba, Alabama, which is borders Mississippi, not too far from Meridian. And I come from a family of sharecroppers as well. And my parents, I was the first person to graduate high school in my family. So my parents did not receive the education that they should have got growing up in the segregated South. But thanks to my aunt, my great aunt, my mother's aunt, who was a migrant worker, so they would go up and down the East Coast picking apples and grapes and stuff like that. And she fortunately fell in love in Syracuse, New York, and never went back down south. And so my parents eventually moved up to Syracuse, New York, when I was about 2 or 3 years old. And I was educated in the public schools up in Syracuse, New York. And I look back, my parents did push education. Education was very important. But looking back on it, I think I was, blessed because I played sports, and sports really motivated me to go to college, to be honest with you. I used to watch a lot of college football, and I wanted to be Herschel Walker and Bo Jackson and people like that. And that really motivated me to go to college. But it was when I was in college, you just had to get a minimum score on the SAT and a minimum score to stay eligible. And so after my freshman year, I was doing the minimum stuff. And I said to my coach, "Oh, I'm okay. You gonna stay eligible?" I said, "Yeah, I'm gonna stay eligible. Don't worry about it." He says, "Why are you settling for minimum grades? You can do so much better." After that conversation, I made the dean's list probably mostly every semester after that. So that was a really motivating factor for me to understand the importance of education. And I was fortunate enough to get into Syracuse University Law School. This was where I graduated from. And I really found an interest in law. And one thing I realized, coming from a family who are not educated, is education and the law are equalizers. I really believe that, for those who don't come from the most fortunate situation, if you use education, if you use the law, you can be equal to anyone, and you can do things that you didn't think you believe you can do. So after graduating from a national law school like Syracuse, you would think there would be a lot of minority lawyers in the Syracuse area. So I started practicing in Syracuse right out of law school for about 5 years. And I was probably one of less than 10 black and minority lawyers in Syracuse, New York, a big city, right? But fortunately, we had two African-American judges up there, Judge McKinney and Judge Sandra Towns, who eventually went to the federal bench. And they provided an example, a role models, a mentor for me, just to see them. They were just like gods to me, like, wow, I can't believe They're judges. And eventually I got the opportunity to come down to the Bronx to be a court attorney. And I must say this, I didn't realize, that there was such a shortage of black male court attorneys. Looking back on it, I was probably the only one in the Bronx. So I probably should have renegotiated my contract a little bit because I was such a commodity. But that gave me the inspiration and the track, and to see judges like Judge Hunter, Alexander Hunter, and other black judges, Judge Latia Martin, and people like that, to say, hey, I can really do this. And I became a special referee in the Bronx, I was the first black special referee in Bronx County. I never realized that. Little things like that. You don't think about it because you're so busy doing the work. And then when you come to programs like this, you go, wow, where is everybody, right? So that's my story. I'll pick it up hopefully a little later with some more questions.
Good evening. Oh, it is working. Good evening. Good evening. Thank you, Judge Renwick. So I don't know that I should be on this panel because they seem to really be focused on going to law school. I wasn't. And I was born in Trinidad, West Indies, came here in my early teens. I was the first person in my family to graduate from high school and from college. When I was in high school, I did well. I always did well on standardized tests. That's not something they say about us, right? But I happened to always do well on these standardized tests. So I took the PSAT. I got this is when they were still mailing brochures. I got bags and bags of brochures, but I wasn't really thinking about college, right? I didn't really know anybody. At that point, I did not know anybody who had gone to college other than probably the people who were teaching me in high school who didn't really take an interest in me. So my father asked me, it was like in February, he says, so where are you going to college? I said, I don't think I'm going to college. He says, I don't know what you're going to be doing in September, but I'm telling you, if you're not in college, you're not going to be under this roof. So I looked at all of those brochures, and I remember the first brochure I received, took it out of the bag, sent in the application, and I was accepted. That's how I went to college, right? And I thought I wanted to be an engineer, but I didn't know any engineers. I thought I wanted to be a mechanical engineer. I didn't understand what it was all about, but I enrolled as a mechanical engineer, and after half a semester, I was like, no, this ain't for me. So I ended up majoring in international affairs, and when I was getting out of college, there were no jobs for people who were liberal arts majors. They were coming for the engineers and all of these different people. So again, the whole thing about standardized tests, because in addition to the PSATs, I'd gotten excellent score on the SATs, and then was the LSATs. And I got a really good score on the LSATs. And so one of my roommates, he had always wanted to go to law school. I still did not know any attorneys. But he said, you know what, you should apply to law school. You got great grades on a great LSAT score. So I applied. I took 5 of his applications that he didn't use. I know this sounds crazy, but I took 5 of his applications that he didn't use. I applied to those 5 schools. I don't remember the 5th one, but I think it was Boston University, Boston College, William and Mary, George Washington. I could never remember the 5th school, and I got in. And so for me at that point, it was who would give me the most money. right? And Boston University gave me the most money to go there. I went to law school, and coming out of law school, now I knew attorneys, right? I knew attorneys because the attorneys were teaching me, right? But again, they still really, in Boston University, in our first year class, we had students of color back then. We had 480 in the first year class. And I think we had about 7 students of color, 3 men, 4 women. I graduated from law school, and I ended up coming back to New York. I worked in a prosecutor's office, then I went to work for a law firm. Hated it. And around the time I wanted to leave the law firm, Robert T. Johnson was about to be elected district attorney of Bronx County. So a friend of mine and I will always be in her corner. Carol Sharp called me up and said, listen, why don't you apply? I applied, I was hired, and I went to work for your husband. And I know sometimes I gave him sleepless nights, but because of my personality, how I approach things, but I always did my best work for him, right? Again, I never really thought about becoming a judge. You know, I was an attorney. I left the DA's office, went to a firm, went back, and people always said that I'd be a judge or the district attorney. I said, no, don't say that. I work for the district attorney. I don't want him to hear I want his job. So one day he came to me, I just finished a case, and I was thinking, what am I gonna do? I thought I had done everything I wanted to do at that point as an attorney, and I was 41 years old. And he came to me and he said, you still want to be on the bench? There had been some talk, but it was never really serious. And I said, sure. And he says, well, fill out that application and give it to me and submit it. You have 3 days to do it. I submitted the application, and I became Mike Bloomberg's first criminal court appointment. My sister sitting over there, I will forever be joined with, Justice Edwina Richardson. She and I were appointed that same day in the first class. So, as an attorney and as a young judge, comparatively speaking to today, there were a lot of black men on the bench. You know, if you practice in the Bronx, Ivan Warner, Eugene Hinkson, Judge Wallace, Judge Gene Oliver, Judge
Hunter.
uh,
Hunter.
Hunter, Judge, he hammered people. What was, no, I forget his name, but there were a lot of black men. I didn't really have any mentors until I met some of these people. And Robert Johnson was obviously my mentor, and so was Richard Mangum. Robert had been a judge. Richard Mangum was not a judge, but you got to understand, having a mentor and somebody taking an interest in you, that was life-changing, right? And then when I got on the bench and I had John Carter and other people like that, I had people who I could pattern myself after. And for me, I had to be good because John Carter would look at me and say, what are you doing? And it was like a father, and I didn't want him to disapprove of what I was doing. So I always tried to do my best. And as a judge, I felt that having been appointed, I needed to be there to do justice. litigants are not always going to agree with your decision. But what you want a litigant to say as they're walking out of the courtroom, I don't agree with his ruling, but I had my day in court. And that's how I've lived my judicial life. The other part of that is that not having had people to necessarily guide me, I believe that we are our brother's keepers. And so mentoring has been a big part of my judicial life. I have one of the unicorns here. My court attorney is the only black male court attorney in Bronx Supreme Court criminal term. If you think you work in a courthouse, think of how many black male court attorneys there are. You can't get to 5 in your courthouse, if you can get to 2, right? And so I believe we have a duty to mentor these folks. And I've known him since he was either 16 or 17. And he now has an 11-year-old daughter, right? And he's been my court attorney for the last, how long, Ron? 5, 6 years, right? Right, yeah, it's 24. So he's there. And the interesting thing now is he's telling me about his interns. So he's obviously learned a little bit from me. The other judge who I forgot who I looked up to was George Covington.
Yeah, come.
So that's part of my story.
So let's pick up on the mentorship point. Can the other panelists talk about who your mentors were? I mean, we have a lot of, I've heard a very repetitive refrain, first in my family, right, on this panel. So who were your mentors and who did you pattern yourselves after, and who gave you that help that you didn't necessarily get from family, as many of our colleagues do?
So first and foremost, my father, but if we're talking about not family, when I was in law school, and I would say there were probably 2 other men of color in my class, the dean of one of the other schools at Hofstra was a woman of color. And she said to me, there's a black male attorney, one of only a few in Nassau County, and he's looking for an intern. So she connected me with him. His name is David Bythewood. So I went to visit with David Bythewood to see, he was running his own practice. And I went in, I had my collar up, came in almost like dancing, like Cool Breeze. And he said, sit down. Put your collar down, fix your tie. That's not gonna work. And so I worked with him, and he sent me everywhere throughout the state. And he was a successful man. He was a proud man. He ended up merging with a firm, a big firm, Reese, Simone, Bythewood, and Gleason. But I learned, and I'm in law school now, what a lawyer should be, what a man of color lawyer should be, and what you should look like, and how you should act. And so I would say, and he's had pivotal points in my life. I then took an internship somewhere else the next year. I wanted to do litigation only. I wanted to be a litigation attorney. And I was recruited out of law school by an accounting firm, Arthur Anderson, because I have an undergraduate in accounting. And it was, I wouldn't say it was a mistake, but I was looking really at the money. That's all I was looking at, because I wanted to be a litigation attorney. And my mentor, David Bythewood, said, you're not going to be happy. So I took the meeting, and they said, well, you're going to be practicing tax court. I said, oh, that's interesting. Anything else? We'll send you on audits. You can get your CPA. Okay, anything else? We're going to send you to and pay for an LLM in tax at NYU. Okay, it's 1988. What else? The salary is $65,000 a year. When do I start? And so I worked there for about a year, and I realized this was not what I wanted. So I actually went back to David Bythewood. No job was available, but he let me sit in his conference room. I said, I have to get up and go somewhere every day. I don't have a job. I resigned. I had money in the bank. I was living with my father. And you know, Judge Yearwood knows it's not easy living with a West Indian parent. My father, if I was there and not working, I would not be there. So I got up every day and sat in this man's conference room, my mentor, and he would send me out and do different things. And ultimately, I brought a case in, and I was hired as an associate. And then again, he taught me what I needed to do. I ended up realizing that I wasn't trying the cases. I was doing appearances and depositions, and the answer was only partners try cases. Okay, so I left and became a prosecutor in Nassau County for the sole purpose of being able to try any case, anywhere, anytime. When I left there and became a partner in a Wall Street law firm, then started my own firm back in Nassau County, again, David Bythewood said to me, we don't have men of color on the bench. I want you to consider going to the bench. And I said, I'm making money now. I'm not looking, maybe 20 years from now. And he said, no, when the political window opens, and it's not open often, you need to jump through it. And so he's the one who guided me on how to get through the political system in Nassau County. In every county, it's different. Bronx is different, upstate is different, the city is different. In Nassau County, it's political party driven. And you need to do what the political party asks you to do to be considered. Now, you're a practicing attorney. Go get signatures, run for office, run for a state senate when you have no interest in being a state senator. You know, those are the things, and so that is my answer about mentoring. So, and that's why it's important. I speak at Wyandanch High School, I speak at Roosevelt High School, I speak wherever I can speak. I'm glad people brought their mentees here tonight, because one point in time, if you remember Back to the Future, the movie Back to the Future, and so Michael J. Fox's character goes into the past, and he sees his father, and he's given his father, in the old past, the father didn't say anything when his then mother is attacked by this guy. And so he encourages him now and to stand up for the person. And he stands up for that moment in time, and you go back to the future, and everything has changed. The father's successful, and the bully is working for the father. So these are all moments in time that can change the trajectory of people's lives. When David Bythewood gave me that internship, and when he said, put your collar down, you're not cool. You want to be a professional. You're not, you know, this is not FIT. Those are the little nuggets, and I couldn't, believe me, I didn't leave my house like that. My father would have struck me. After I got in the car, I went, hey, the tie all up, and so that was my mentor.
Well, I think for me it's a little different, because my mentors were not attorneys or judges. When I got out of law school, and it's an interesting story. I know many know Judge Randy Jackson. And Randy Jackson wanted to increase the number of black attorneys in the DA's office in Brooklyn. So he followed the DA Gold to an open meeting one day. And he stood up when he was running for election, and he said, how come you never hire any black people? And Eugene Gold says, well, we don't hire any because they don't apply. And Randy Jackson, who was a private lawyer then, says, of course, they apply. And Eugene Gold said that if you find them, I will hire them. So Randy Jackson, sight unseen, went on this mission to find black people that he could refer to the Brooklyn DA. Okay? Just totally out of the blue. He was not a judge yet. This is something that he wanted to do. I was in law school in Boston, Northeastern University. I had been given an offer to do a corporate job at the Prudential Insurance Company in Newark. You know, corporate, you know, big time. So I had a choice of that or applying to the DA's office. Now, the reason black people couldn't get through the DA's office is because they had this multi-tier application system. You had to apply, you had to be interviewed by one assistant. Then you had to be interviewed by a panel of 2 more assistants. Then you had to be interviewed, I think, by a bureau chief, and then you got to the DA. Well, the Italians controlled this process. So you had to go to an assistant who was usually Italian or a different ethnicity, and they would always bounce you, so you could not get to the DA. This DA decided that he would find a way that if you applied, he would interview you. So regardless of how they bounced you at the earlier levels, this DA on his own decided to hire, and I think we had the largest class there. It had to be almost 30 Black and Hispanic assistants that year. And that was back in 1977. Purely on this particular non-white Hispanic man making a commitment to a Black lawyer. And once we get in, we become DAs, and you know, that's a different story. But the next move for me is they would not promote me to where I wanted, and a man named Albert Van, many of you know him, is a very famous elected official, was fighting a ballot access case in court. He had been thrown off the ballot. He eventually got back on the ballot and ran and got elected, and he vowed that if he ever had to run again, he would never run without having his own lawyer. And he hired me out of the DA's office to be his counsel at the assembly, and I became the counsel to the Black and Puerto Rican Legislative Caucus up in Albany, all 24 members. And I was basically 3 years out of law school. So I am now the counsel to 24 Black and Hispanic elected officials in the Senate and the Assembly, and we are the caucus that is engaging Governor Cuomo, and at that time it was Cuomo Sr. And at that particular time, we sponsored a lawsuit, redistricting lawsuit, based on the Voting Rights Act against the city of New York for a biased redistricting plan. And it was the first suit in New York under Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. To make a long story short, I went to federal court. I was the lead counsel. We got bounced. We had to go down to Washington to meet with justice under Section 5. We did all this work. And finally, 2 days before the election in 81, we got before a 3-judge court. It was Amalia Kearse, who many of you know was the senior justice of this court. And it was a Voting Rights Act violation. I argued the case. We prevailed. And we held up all the elections, mayor, city council, back then for a violation of the Voting Rights Act. Well, the city immediately appealed. Now, since this is a 3-judge federal court, it goes directly to the Supreme Court. The city immediately filed cert, and they jumped on a plane the next day, and they flew to Washington, D.C. And of course, the Second Circuit, the judge is Thurgood Marshall. Thurgood Marshall wrote portions of the Voting Rights Act. And the city was on the 3 o'clock plane. That's when they had Eastern Airlines. You could just walk over there and they would fly. Even if there was only one person, they would pull out the plane. Well, my attorneys, we went on there. We were on the 4 o'clock plane. And we had to argue the case before Thurgood Marshall at 5 o'clock the day before the election of all citywide elections. Now, I'm 3 years out of law school. And I am the lead counsel that's arguing this case before Thurgood Marshall in Washington, D.C. And it's an interesting experience. You know, the news are there. They're all over the TV. Al Van and everybody's back in New York, and they're watching the TV, what's happening and what are we going to win this case? And it was interesting because I got huge props because Thurgood Marshall decided in our favor. And what he actually did is because it was in September and the court was in recess, he literally thought it was important enough to call the other 8 justices. So he did a conference call with them because it involved the entire city of New York. Okay. And we had to go up and meet in his chambers. You know, if you've ever been in the Supreme Court, you know, the carpet is like really thick. You just sink right down in. And we all come in, and as an experience, we're all in our best suits. The corporation counsel is there, the U.S. attorney is there. You know, we're all in these dark blue pinstripe white bond white shirts. And of course, he shows up, and he basically has on khaki pants and a band. And, you know, and so it's a setup because he's got his clerks in each of the 4 corners of the room. You know, they laugh and they know how this is gonna go. The city's gonna get smacked around. But anyway, just to make a long story short, it was very, very prestigious to have to win that case. And I can't really say, the law was totally on our side, but I can't really say it was my legal acumen. It's the fact that I'm arguing a case before the man who wrote the Section 5 provision of the Voting Rights Act. So naturally, he is going to side against the city of New York. That case was a major case in the proliferation of districts which to this day exist as Black and Hispanic voting rights districts. So as a mentor, you know, Al Van was the one who gave me that opportunity to really, really prosper and be an attorney. And I never, ever thought I would be a judge. I was offered a judge. I said, judge? I said, I'm tired for that. You know, after being a charter revision attorney, I was offered a judgeship or to run for judge. I told him no. Later, a county leader wanted me to run the judge, and I just said no. I just thought there was so many other things that were important to do for Black attorneys. There's so much you can do when the state of New York conveys upon you this huge responsibility and this huge power as a lawyer. You are a lawyer. You are one of the elite members of society. You have huge, huge power. And then I later found, well, the only people who have more power than that are judges, so, I succumbed to the role. But I went to the bench late because I've only been a judge 15 years. I was fortunate enough to be able to go straight to Supreme, but that was because of political activities early on. But mentorship is key. I didn't really have a mentor as I went to the bench, but mentorship as an attorney, I had very many of those, and I'm very thankful for those. And Al Van was one, and Arthur Eve was one, and Denny Farrell was one. There was a whole litany of elected officials who guided my career so that I could be here in service of the state.
Well, after hearing that story, I realized how lucky and blessed I am because I became a court attorney in 1998. And before that, like I said, I was practicing in Syracuse, one of the few minority lawyers up there, and I was starving, right? So Judge Frank Torres gave me an opportunity to be his court attorney because he was going to retire at the end of that year. So it really gave me my foot in the door. And the best advice he ever gave to me was to join the Black Bar Association of Bronx County. And that was the first time I really seen Black and brown attorneys that were really doing things. Alvin Yearwood, Sharon Aramis, who were president, our PJ, Judge Renwick. I'd never seen that before because I didn't have that experience up in Syracuse to see people who looked like me accomplishing what they were accomplishing. So when I was Judge Torres' court attorney, did criminal supreme, did murder cases and stuff like that. And now Judge Guy Mitchell was the ADA trying this big murder case. And it's like, I would never have the courage to do a murder case. But being a court attorney, I was able to see this black lawyer, Guy Mitchell, trying a murder case that no one wanted to try. It was an old murder case, and the victim was a person that worked in the Bronx County Courthouse. And just to see him arguing, asking questions, doing things like that, I was like, wow, I can really do something. I can really try to accomplish what these phenomenal black lawyers and black and brown lawyers are doing. And so I still didn't think about being a judge because I just thought that was just out of my reach. And we moved up to Supreme Court. I was with Judge Latia Martin at this time as her court attorney. And we got transferred over to Supreme Court Civil. And then I started associating with Judge Hunter. We were next door to Judge Renwick before she became to the appellate division. And I started thinking, Judge Sharon Aarons ran for judge. When she ran for judge, and she was a court attorney with me at the time, she ran for judge. And when she became a judge, I was like, wow, that's something I can do. And so when I look at mentorship that led me to where I am today, it really was my participation in the Black Bar Association. So I would say to anyone out there who's interested in becoming a judge or anything like that, join your local bar associations and things like that, and work with and network with people who look like you, and you never know what can happen from there.
So mentorship is clearly key, but we heard in some of Justice Wooten's remarks some issues around process at the DA's office. What sort of process-related or structural obstacles do you all perceive when it comes to ascending to the bench for people who might be interested?
Well, as I said, I was appointed to the bench in January of 2003, and I came out of the district attorney's office at that time. What I was told when I was applying was, black folks don't get appointed, right? If you want to get to the bench, you have to run, because getting appointed is extremely political, and you have to be a part of a certain group to be appointed, right? However, one of my first two mentors, Robert Johnson, shepherded my application. Didn't do anything funky. He would just understand what was happening with my application, and he would tell me, listen, when you interviewed there, how do you listen to this? He said, you didn't pump yourself enough. Could you, I was like, right. I was like, what? He said, no, you didn't pump yourself. And so he gave me those pointers, right? And were it not for him, I would not have been appointed by Mayor Bloomberg. I have that direct line, because you asked these people about mentors before him and Richard Mangum and the people in the Bronx Black Bar. My mentor was God. And I know y'all are saying that brother's on some strange stuff. No. God protects infants and fools, right? And I was not an infant, because I did a lot of things that should have ended it. But I was protected, and now I'm here sitting here giving you all my stories. So, but Robert Johnson is the reason that I made it to the bench. And so I couldn't disappoint him.
And I came through the elected process. So politics does play a big role. And it's funny to hear him say how political the appointment process is when it's the elected process that gets the most criticism about, the politics in selecting our judges. But politics does play a huge role in becoming a judge. And I think every judge who's in here can attest to that. So when you say obstacles, it's very important that you network. Networking is so important because you never know who knows who. And that introduction to the right person, especially a politician or especially a person who's in with the politicians, that could be your key to achieving what you're trying to achieve, especially if you want to become a judge. And that's what happened with me. I got actually Judge Aarons used to make me go to volunteer all the time with the politics, but she was introducing me to other people, different people, and from there, I was able to run for judge, and luckily I got elected.
Other thoughts on process?
Well, there's two processes. You either get appointed and you do the appointed process, whether that be court of claims or whether that be the city through the family court or the civil court, or you throw down and you run. Okay, and many times, many of us are successful just by, in the face of no evidence, you go to a district and you say, I live here, I want to make a difference, and then you decide to run. Well, running is very expensive now. Before it was not. When I was younger, people could run a civil court campaign for $30,000. Now, many civil campaigns are close to $150,000 or more just to be able to run in a civil court seat. So there are barriers. There's barriers to cost. There's barriers to networking. So if I had to think about it, the question is, when do you want to become a judge if you're going to become a judge? Nowadays, judges are running 10 years out of law school. They're assistant law clerk, they're 12 years out, they're running for judge. My generation, you did your legal career. You spent 20, 30 years as a lawyer, and at the end of your career, being to the judiciary was like the crowning of your achievements. And then you would move up the ladder and you would end up in the appellate division and hopefully the Court of Appeals or even federal court. And you had 30 years of experience to bring to the bench. That's not how it is now. So there are barriers depending each way. So the question is, you need to determine which route people want to do, and the bar associations can help you. And you need to have mentors who can guide you through either road. Do you want to go the appointed road, or do you want to go the elected road?
So when we're talking about barriers, first of all, it depends on obviously where you are. Where are we talking about? So I'll give you the Nassau County viewpoint. The barriers to becoming a Nassau County Assistant District Attorney are similar to what Judge Wooten outlined. So you have an interview, then you have a panel interview, then you have another interview, then you meet with the DA. So those are the barriers, which led to, when I was in the DA's office, I was the only man of color. That presents a barrier to becoming a judge, because in Nassau County for many, many years was extremely conservative. And in order to be considered for the bench, neither of the two political leaders, and it was Democrat and Republican, would consider a candidate for the bench if they weren't a former prosecutor. So already you have a built-in limitation. So knowing this, my mentor said, you have that background and we need men of color on the bench. Would you consider it? And I said, not right now. And he says, well, let me get you into the process. So the political process really is, in Nassau County, is a closed process. Someone has to bring you to the dance. Someone has to vouch for you. You have to decide what party you're involved in. And then the party you're involved in dictated if you were going to get elected. Because one party, if you ran in an odd year as a Democrat, you were not getting elected. So that was just a race that didn't count. Oh, you want to be a judge? Run in '93. He's never going to win. So, so that, because it's not like the city. The city is more club-oriented, and it's one party. Nassau County, it would go back and forth. So the parties know that. So now, what do you need to do to get on the line to be considered for judge? Years of getting ballots, knocking on doors, handing out things. I'm running a private practice. I don't have time to, give out. So that's one of the ways you get involved. The other way, the fast track is, why don't you run for something that you're never going to win? And so I was asked to run for state senate in 2002. Had no interest in state senate. And by the way, run against Kemp Hannon, who is one of the biggest well-known people of all time in the medical field as a state senator. Run for state senate against him. So the party told me, just put your name in. You don't have to worry about it. But I don't operate like that. So I put my name in and I ran. And I showed up at all the events. And Kemp Hannon was known for never campaigning. He would show up sitting next to me at Baptist churches clapping on Sunday because Newsday endorsed me and because I was running. And I lost to him basically the closest 51-49. All right, so now I'm on the map with the party. So, okay, you want to run for judge? Run for judge next year. Well, that's 2003. I can't win in 2003.
That's right.
But that's the appeasement. Oh, he's done what we asked. So I ran. The other thing about this is called persistence. So I ran and lost. But then, because of relationships, David Bythewood, there was a vacancy on the position that I had run and lost for because a judge had won Supreme, so there was an opening. So I was appointed then by the county executive, 2004. If you're appointed, you serve till the end of the year, and then you have to run again. So then I had to run again. That's the even year. So I won that year, right? So then, a couple years later, I want to run for county court. Oh, this guy's back again. All right, you run for county court. It's 2007. So now you're not going to win. So I ran and lost. So now we're talking about running 5 times in 7 years. 5 times in 7 years. And because the world comes full circle, in 2007, after I lost, there was an opening starting 2008. And the person who was the minority leader when I ran for state senate, who had supported my campaign, was David Patterson. Now he's Governor Patterson, so he appoints me to the county court. Now I get to run in 2008. That's a good year. I ran with President Obama. And I would show up at places, campaign places, and say, wow, you don't look anything like you look. I supported you. And I said, you did? And she said, yes. Congratulations, President Obama. So that's the process. Now, fortunately, in Long Island, most things are cross-endorsed. I think the best way is for the bar associations to make recommendations, because if it's political, if it's elected, it's political parties wielding all the power. If it's appointed, it's the emperor or the empress wielding all the power. You're on the inside, you're not on the inside. So there is no great answer, but you just need to know the system where you are, and you need someone to bring you in to make sure that people know that you're serious.
Professor, I'd like to add one thing.
Did you call me professor?
Professor. If you're in any of the 5 boroughs, I would suggest you don't go one route exclusively, because it just happened for me because I was there at the right time with Robert Johnson. But I was also living in Harlem, and I was pursuing the elective process. I was the life member of a club, and I probably would have been elected in a couple of years, but this appointed route just happened for me much earlier.
So I think we are close to our time, if not over. Do we have time for a couple of questions, one or two questions? We do? All right. So I'm going to come back to you gentlemen with my final question in a moment, but I want to give our attendees a chance to ask a couple of questions.
Hello, Your Honors. I am Jermel McClure. I'm a third-year law student at Columbia Law School, and I am really interested in understanding how you would go about receiving information on the soft skills outside of doing your best research and writing in terms of understanding how to navigate the legal space, but also the path to the bench. Thank you.
I didn't hear the question.
Networking.
Oh, oh, okay.
I'll jump in. Networking, this is what I tell my first-year students and what I tell both our BALSA and LALSA students. I'm faculty advisor to both groups. Networking, mentorship, and understanding the organization you're in outside of just your specific responsibilities. And that's whether you work in a firm, a private firm, the DA's office, wherever you work, understanding the big picture even while you're learning your job. I tell my students that the last time I got a job by just submitting a resume and waiting to get called for an interview, 1998 was the last time I got a job that way. Every other job I've gotten since then, including the job I have now, was about knowing the people, knowing the organization, and having a sense of timing, my timing, the organization's timing, the decision maker's timing, and finding ways to make those all come together.
One easy answer is alumni from your law school who are on the bench. Write this name down. Joseph Zayas. Chief Administrative Judge of all the courts in New York State, Columbia Law grad. You'll get a call back, you get a meeting, that's the fast track.
Also become politically active. Become politically active.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm Judge Chambers in Bronx Civil. I am so happy to see all of you here because this is definitely a topic that we talk about behind the scenes too often. So it's nice to see it out on the front street. So my question is, aside from doing panels like this, what can we do to increase the matriculation amongst Black men in law school? And then, of course, to convince them to be interested in pursuing careers in the judiciary. I mean, I did my own little soft research of asking people that I know that are currently lawyers. And of course, the main two issues or barriers, I should say, was one, a feeling of censorship and not being able to say what they would want to say. And the second was the obvious, which is they could make a whole lot of money and break some financial generational ceilings being in private practice. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on how we can get more matriculation and how we can get people who are in the profession to consider careers in the judiciary.
No, I'm really not so sure that that's the primary problem with getting Black males in the judiciary. You want to have, in order for the system to be legitimate, people who come to our justice system have to see people who look like them. And if they don't see people who look like them, and it's regardless of any trial court they come to, then they don't believe in the system. There's no legitimacy. They don't have faith in it. And they don't abide by the rulings of the court because they think it's biased. And, you know, I sort of reflected on this a bit when I was thinking about why we don't have more Black males in the system. We've already said you got 35,800 graduates every year. About 2.7% of those are Black men. If you extrapolate the 8%, based on the number of black women to men, because it's about 66-33. In law school, you've got a national average of twice as many black women to men. So you've got maybe 1,000 graduates every year who are black males out of 35,000 graduates nationally. That's untenable. How do you increase the 1,000? And, and you think of those barriers, and the barriers are black males are not coming up through the system, whether it be college or otherwise, and the question is why? And I think back and I said, well, what was the turning point for me? And, I think back, when I was 16 years old, I was working at the A&P. I was an exemplary employee. I walked out to get the carriages. Somebody came in and stuck up the store. It was an armed robbery. I come back in, police are outside. All of a sudden, I'm the prime suspect on the inside job. Okay? There's no evidence whatsoever that I have anything to do with this armed robbery at 16. But right away, the police have me, and they want to question me. They want to put me in the police car. They put me in the police car, want to take me downtown, and because I'm the primary suspect, because I'm maybe one of 2 black employees in the store. How different that would have turned out if I didn't know what to do at 16. And that's only because I'd been accused in middle school by the police in school, and it's just this long social barriers that point to why black males are not available to go on. And part of that is just the social inherent bias that goes along with being a black male in America. That's what I'm prepared to say. If you talk to any black male and ask them about it, you'll hear a similar story. The story I tell you, it's not unique. Somewhere in their background, there will be something where they're either pulled over or they're falsely accused. I can tell you at least 4 times where I have been falsely accused. I was a judge. I was falsely accused. Police pulled me over 4 years ago for no reason whatsoever. My registration was fine. My license was fine. I was not speeding, yet they pulled me over because they could. And when I produced the registration and got out of the car, I was walking my dog and produced the registration in the car and everything else, and I was going to my father's house, and I'm 50 feet from my father's house when they pulled me over, and everything is fine, and I said I was going to my house, which I own, by the way. He doesn't know that. He asked me, did I have proof that I lived in that house? And I was just stunned. In this day and age, I have to prove, because I'm being pulled over falsely, that I'm going to that house, I have to prove that I live in that house. So I don't want to belabor the point, but there are lots of factors that go to why you don't have a larger pool of eligible black men who are going to college, who are moving up the ranks to get to law school. And, there's lots of issues of inherent bias and social injustice that is cutting that number down. I don't know how to deal with that.
So, understanding the problems, I work on a granular level. I currently have 3 high school interns. 2 of them are black men. I try to show them the right way, so does my court attorney, Ron. When people come along who are interested in going to the bench, like Brother Seth Steed over there, I remember him when he first started talking about it, I encourage him. With Ron, I encourage him, I try to guide him along the way. So while I would like a bigger pool, I try to work with what I have.
Other thoughts on the panel?
I would just add opportunity. If you know, black males or any person that wants the opportunity, give them an internship. You know, I come from the old saying, each one teach one, each one help one, all right? And that's how you get, you know, people in that pipeline that will end up being a Columbia Law student and things like that. So that's very important as well, because we do experience those barriers. We can all tell a story about getting stopped by the police or wrongfully accused of something. Absolutely.
I think we have to show up. We have to be in public. We have to be in schools. We're working on that in the Office of Court Administration. Community outreach, we're hiring someone in each community where we go and present ourselves as role models. I know, you know, a lot of people say, I don't want to be a role model. You're a role model if you graduated from college. You're a role model if you graduated from law school. You're a role model as a lawyer. You're a role model as a judge. I like Judge Yearwood's granular technique. It's one person at a time, one school at a time, so that they can see us. They know it's possible. It's one thing to not know. You don't know any judges, you don't know any lawyers, so you're taking a leap of faith. But at this point, we need to let it be known that this is possible and give some advice on what to do when you get pulled over by the police, what to do when you have to go to an interview with the DA's office through 4 panels, what to do with the political machines. We have to, those who have gone before have taught us, and we have to teach the next generation. And if Chief Administrative Judge Joe Zayas doesn't call you back, call me.
I'm gonna add one thought to that. Given the how early black men in particular can be diverted from the path for a number of reasons, it's that much more important to make yourselves visible early. At PACE, we have for a long time partnered with the State Judicial Institute on the New York Leo program, basically mentoring and giving a boot camp experience to students from underrepresented groups who have applied to law school for that following fall. And it started to occur to me that that's kind of late to be, and you're working with a very small pool at that late stage. And so what we started doing was looking for opportunities to put ourselves, and I say ourselves, I mean students and faculty across our community, not just people of color, but anyone who is interested in diversity in the profession, putting them in front of high school students. At some point, I'd like to get us in front of junior high school students, but any opportunity you have to put yourself in front of a young person early so that they know it's possible, so that they can do the things they need to do to prepare, and not just look up one day and say, I think I want to be a lawyer, but actually plan for that and think about the things they need to be doing. So any opportunity you get to do that, I like the idea of getting granular. You meet somebody, you know somebody, you went to high school somewhere. Have you checked in with your high school to let them know you'd like to be available to talk to students? Again, like I said, you went to junior high school somewhere, or middle school somewhere. Have you checked in with them? So I think, again, given that risky early off point, it's got to be before someone's in college. It's got to be high school or before, when you're getting yourself out in front of them to show them what's possible.
Just make a couple of suggestions. I was very fortunate to help establish college success and access programs in 4 Bronx Catholic high schools fairly recently. There's some organizations that you can support. So money is a big part of it, whether you've had College Advising Corps, Peer Forward, 2 great organizations that help students, all students, but students from underrepresented groups make it into college and think about what they want to study, be sort of more thoughtful about, you know, the program of study, what they want to do in life. Just lots of great organizations are now really helping students get into college and stay in college. So it's one thing that you can easily do is just donate to some great organizations, college access and success.
Thank you. All right, one last question. We'll do two.
Quick comment, especially I think it's imperative that we take action, especially given the Supreme Court's decision concerning the admissions of students into more sort of competitive schools and, not being able to use race as a criteria.
And if anybody wants to talk to me offline about that, I'm very happy to talk to you. I have ideas.
Thank you. Good evening, Xavier Carr. My question to the judges is, what is something that you discovered after you became judge that you wish you would have known when you were either running or seeking an appointment?
You never know as much as you thought as you think you do, and you hire a good court attorney, somebody you trust, who will not do a decision with fictitious cases. I'm not kidding you. But the bottom line is you don't know a lot of stuff, and you hire that court attorney that you trust. My court attorney is like my son. We have a very close relationship because we knew each other for about 15 years or so before he became my court attorney, but even so, that's the exception. But you need to have somebody you trust or it can go sideways.
Isn't it really like he's your grandson? I don't know if the son analogy works.
See, he's one of my bosses, so I'll remain silent.
I would say, and this goes for the point in time up till I became a judge. I mean, I practiced law for 16 years, state, federal litigation, all on both sides of personal injury cases, both sides of criminal law. When I, first day as a judge, sat in arraignments and an individual was brought before me, and what I said would determine whether he went home, it was a male, or was taken into custody, that's when I realized the magnitude of what it is to be a judge and the effect you have on people's lives.
And I would just add to that the importance of being a really good listener. I mean, being a judge, Judge Gilbert said a little earlier, you're not going to rule in everybody's favor. Everybody's your friend when you're ruling in their favor, but as soon as you rule against them, you're the worst judge in history. But our goal, your goal should be as a judge is really to, when a person leaves that courtroom, win or lose, they felt like they received justice, they felt like they were heard. That's very important to me.
I think that and this didn't happen to me, but it's happened to so many other judges I know, since your life now is dominated by your role as a judge or justice, okay? It takes over your entire persona for most of your life, because no matter where you go, how you conduct yourself, if you're on vacation, people will see you as this judicial officer. So be prepared for that. Be prepared for that. And the second thing is, to the extent that you need to make political alliances, because you will need them if you are to ascend to certain levels, make those alliances before you become a judge. If you are thinking about this and you know, you're living in your community and you know your state senator and you know your city council person and you know you're working on some proposition that the governor's chief of staff is working on because you're a lawyer through the Bar Association, those alliances should be cemented or created before you get to the judiciary because it will help you immensely once you get there.
So with that, we will conclude our panel. I want to thank our panelists for extremely revealing and insightful, and I thank you for your sharing your personal stories and journeys. And I want to thank all of you for being here and really making clear the importance of the crisis. We all hopefully took a little bit away from this that we can use in our interactions. If you want to talk, like I said, you want to talk to me about other things that we could do. If you want to partner with the legal education community in terms of moving forward, I would love to discuss ideas, but hopefully we've each taken something from tonight's program that we can use to move things forward when it comes to representation on the bench. So thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. This is more than we could have asked for. We had an excellent panel with so many good takeaways, and I thank you all for being here. Hope it's the first of many programs we can have here at the Appellate Division.